July 21, 2012, Moscow region, Noginsky district, 10 p.m. They are walking in a line along the edge of an unlit country road, heading toward the nearest bus stop. The asphalt is damp. She is behind the wheel of a heavy SUV. The car is moving in the same direction as the pedestrians is. On a narrow stretch of the road, the car's trajectory changes sharply. The SUV leaves the paved lane and veers onto the shoulder at high speed. Impact. 5 people are left lying on the ground. Only one teenager survives from the entire group. Typically, in such situations, chaos ensues immediately, emergency calls, shouting, attempts to save the victims. But the chronology of events on the Besserovskoye highway instantly shatters the standard script. The heavy vehicle comes to a stop in the ditch. The driver does not exit the cabin. Witnesses to the incident run up to the SUV. The doors are locked from the inside. Bystanders pound on the car window. They demand that a medical kit be passed out immediately. The people on the ground urgently need help. Every second counts, but a harsh refusal comes from the locked cabin. No bandages, no medical supplies will be handed over. Then something happens that completely changes the picture. Witnesses clearly hear the sound of the starter running. The driver is trying again and again to start the stalled engine. The condition of the wrecked car makes it impossible to move. However, the logic of the actions is absolutely clear. The person behind the wheel didn't even plan to go out to the victims. She was intending to drive away. This raises a very logical question: who exactly is sitting in the locked car right now? And why, instead of calling an ambulance, is this person wasting time trying to escape? Police units arriving at the scene unlock the doors of the wrecked Land Rover Freelander. Behind the wheel is a 24-year-old Moscow resident, Ekaterina Zatsul. Reviewing her documents provides the first basic summary. The Muscovite has no official place of employment. She is the legal guardian of 2 small children, aged 4 and 1.5. The heavy vehicle belongs to her personally and was purchased quite recently. At first glance, we see the standard profile of a young mother. You must agree, this status does not at all fit the behavior of someone who just coldly ignored pleas to hand over bandages. Checking the driver's records in the traffic police database shifts the focus. Inquiries reveal a systemic problem. In just a few months of the current year, Ekaterina Zatsul has been held administratively liable 3 times. In all 3 cases, the reason for the fines was identical: speeding. The habit of ignoring speed limits is documented. An inspection of the cabin reveals one more important detail. Ekaterina was not alone in the car. Her common-law husband, Nikolai Stashnikov, was sitting in the front passenger seat. The presence of an adult companion nearby immediately causes logical bewilderment. If there were 2 people in the vehicle, how exactly were the roles distributed before this trip? And most importantly, where was the heavy SUV coming from and going to so late at night? While the patrolman process, the driver, the investigative team, begins work on the shoulder. The identification procedure is underway. Experts are collecting scattered belongings, documents, and phones. Gradually, an accurate picture emerges of exactly who ended up under the wheels of the SUV. The victims were not random fellow travelers. It's one big family. The official reports record the details. The Syomens, spouses Andrei and Elena, their 7-year-old daughter, Sasha, Andrei's sister, and Elena, close friend, Analia. The only survivor of the collision, the 15-year-old daughter of Syomens' sister. Analyzing this list, I find myself thinking about the frightening statistics. A standard police accident report effectively documents the simultaneous disappearance of several generations of one family but the chain, on that unlit road. Andrei and Elena have one more child, an 11-year-old daughter. That evening, she didn't go to the bus stop with the others. She stayed at home. It is precisely this fact that saves her life while simultaneously making her an orphan. Now the investigators face the task of step-by-step reconstructing the routes of all those involved in the accident. To understand the circumstances under which the car hit the people, we need to rewind time a few hours and see how this journey began for Ekaterina Zatsul and her passenger. A few hours before the operational team arrived at the collision site at a summer cottage village called Mechta, a picnic is taking place here. Ekaterina and Nikolai are spending time in nature. The criminal case files clearly record the main circumstances of this outing: consumption of alcoholic beverages. Later, official reports will confirm that before getting into the car, the woman had consumed alcohol. Closer to nightfall, the pair decides to end their outing and leave the cottage community. They head to the parking lot, and at this point, an action occurs that shifts a routine situation into a criminal matter. The intoxicated Ekaterina takes the driver's seat. Nikolai takes the passenger seat next to her. Studying such reports, I always try to find logic in the decision-making mechanism. Two adults finish their drinking session. One of them is clearly intoxicated, yet it is they who take the keys to the heavy vehicle. What urgent necessity forced them to leave at night and head out onto a dark road? The engine is started. The SUV rolls out the village gates onto a narrow road. The car heads toward the Gorkovsky Highway. Road conditions are already difficult at this moment. The asphalt is wet, and the tire grip is significantly reduced. Nevertheless, the driver presses the gas pedal and active acceleration begins. Several hours after processing the accident, the suspect is taken to a medical office. The examination gives the investigation precise figures. The equipment shows the presence of alcohol in the range from 0.5 to 1.1 promille. The state of intoxication acquires the status of official evidence. The initial interrogation begins. The detainee confirms she was driving and does not dispute the fact of the collision itself. But then, her personal explanation appears in the case files. Zatsul claims she hit the road solely due to critical circumstances. According to her testimony, back at the picnic, Nikolai Stashnikov felt sharp pain in his stomach. The woman classifies this as a direct threat to his health and states that the only purpose of the trip was the emergency transport of her partner to the nearest clinic. Consider the cleverness of this phrasing. From a legal perspective, this argument is intended to reclassify a common crime as actions taken in a state of necessity. The investigation begins verifying this motive, comparing it against the documented chronology of events on the shoulder. A stark contradiction arises. Claims of providing emergency aid to a passenger directly conflict with the already known refusal to contact witnesses and the sound of the engine turning over. Detectives analyze the sequence of actions. A crucial detail is noted. No attempts were made to call for medical help immediately from the locked vehicle. Look at this situation analytically. A real fight to save a life in a wrecked car always involves calling for medics, not trying to turn the ignition key. The investigative team deems the sick-stomach version untenable. Behavior after the impact is assessed as sober calculation and an attempt to leave the scene before patrols arrived. Realizing the failure of the initial tactic, defense attorney Vladimir Zemlyansky takes over. He completely shifts the defense strategy, building a new line directed against the victims themselves. The lawyer officially voices the new position. The blame for the collision is shifted onto the group of pedestrians themselves. The defense claims that the people grossly violated traffic regulations. The first argument is entered into the case file. Direction. The group was walking with the flow of traffic, backs to the vehicles. By rule, outside of residential areas, pedestrians are required to move along the left side facing oncoming traffic. The lawyer then increases the pressure. It is asserted that the people were not on the dirt shoulder but walking directly on the paved roadway. As a next step, the defense posits that the deceased themselves could have been intoxicated, which supposedly led to their erratic movement. Let us break down this legal maneuver. The defense does not deny the collision itself, but tries to introduce a concept of shared liability into the case. If the investigation agrees that the pedestrians provoked the accident by their position on the road, it will automatically lower the driver's level of culpability. From a legal standpoint, the tactic is clear. It is a calculation to redistribute blame, but the lawyer's statement is merely a verbal interpretation of events. Yes. To confirm or completely refute this version, law enforcement needs cold figures and the laws of physics. Automotive technical experts are brought in. The specialists are given a specific task to reconstruct the exact route of the heavy vehicle before it lost control and to calculate its kinetic energy. Now, the key factor for the investigation is not which side of the road the pedestrians were on, but exactly what physical actions the driver took seconds before veering into the ditch. The results of the technical expert analysis are placed on the investigator's desk. Specialists reconstruct the final seconds before the impact. Analysis of the damage and tire marks of the total braking distance provides exact figures. A few moments before going into the ditch, the vehicle speed was between 115 and 120 kilometers per hour. Let's look at this data without emotion. Relying solely on mathematics and physics, a narrow, unlit road, a wet surface. Okontos Uj quickly reduces tire grip, and a heavy car flying at a speed exceeding any limits for such rural sections. The experts then proceed to analyze the trajectory of movement in detail. It turns out that just before the collision, the driver pulled out to overtake the traffic ahead. This is where the main violation is recorded, triggering a chain of irreversible consequences. The maneuver begins on a stretch where overtaking is strictly prohibited by road markings. Moreover, the road itself curves at this point, leading into a turn. The mechanics of the loss of control become perfectly clear. Entering a turn on wet asphalt at 120 kilometers per hour makes a skid inevitable. The SUV physically could not stay in its lane. The laws of inertia simply pulled it off the road and threw it outward. This technical conclusion completely destroys the defense's argument regarding the pedestrian's guilt. Expert analysis proves that the victim's went to the road's edge no longer played any role. The metal flying in an uncontrollable skid left them not a fraction of a second to assess the threat and try to run aside. The official cause of the collision is recognized as criminal negligence by the person behind the wheel, not the group's location on the shoulder. The tactic of shifting responsibility onto the victims fails. Realizing that it is impossible to dispute the technical facts and physics of the accident, the defense changes its strategy. Now the lawyer's main goal is to try to save the defendant from actual imprisonment using legal loopholes before the open hearings begin. The investigation materials are transferred to the authorities. Preliminary hearings begin to decide on the measure of restraint. The state prosecutor makes a firm demand to keep the driver in custody and extend her time in the detention center by another 6 months. The prosecution's argument is based on risks. While free, the defendant could potentially flee justice or try to pressure the few witnesses to the incident. The defense lawyers counter this move with a reciprocal motion. They request to change the measure of restraint and transfer their client to house arrest. As justification, they provide the court with documents regarding her lack of prior criminal convictions and her permanent residence in the capital. The judge weighs the arguments of both sides and issues a ruling. The defense's request is denied. Detention in the cell is extended until March 10, 2013. Having suffered a local defeat, the defense team initiates a second, much more serious legal maneuver. An official petition is filed with the court to hear the criminal case under the so-called judicial procedure. I periodically have to analyze such procedural moves in criminal practice, so it is important to explain the hidden mechanics here. The special procedure is a kind of plea bargain. The defendant declares full admission of guilt, and in return, the judicial investigation follows a drastically shortened scheme. The judge does not question witnesses, summon experts, or publicly analyze the evidence. But the main goal of this move lies elsewhere. Under the special procedure, the law strictly prohibits imposing a sentence exceeding 2/3 of the maximum term for the charged offense. Essentially, it is a legal tool that allows one to guaranteed shave years off a prison sentence without long and unpleasant proceedings. However, one mandatory condition is required to trigger this algorithm: the consent of absolutely all participants in the case. The representative of the prosecution and the relatives of the deceased strongly oppose it. The prosecutor states that the case must be heard exclusively under the general procedure. The victims refuse to make concessions and are officially blocking the defense's initiative. The motion is denied. This court decision means the case cannot be closed through an expedited procedure, PNJ. Now the authorities must publicly reconstruct the mechanics of that evening in open court. Taking all collected expert reports and testimonies into account, law enforcement can finally piece together the scattered physical elements into one final timeline. Open court hearings begin. Prosecution presents the court with a second-by-second timeline of the collision compiled from all previously obtained data and calculations. The picture is being reconstructed step by step. A heavy SUV is moving along a straight section of the road. Another vehicle is traveling ahead in the same direction. The distance between them is rapidly closing. The person behind the wheel decides to pass the slower car. The steering wheel is turned sharply to the left. The vehicle enters the oncoming lane, completely ignoring the prohibited road markings. Then the laws of physics take over. The road at this stretch ceases to be straight and turns into a curve, and the SUV enters the turn at full speed. When analyzing the materials of such car accidents, you always try to find that split second after which it is impossible to prevent the consequences. In this case, it happens exactly at the moment when centrifugal force exceeds the coefficient of tire grip on the wet surface. The car is pulled off its intended course. From this second on, it is no longer the driver controlling the process, but kinetic energy. The 2-ton body goes into a severe, uncontrolled skid. The car slides diagonally, leaves the asphalt and flies onto the dirt shoulder. At this exact point in space, 6 people are walking with their backs to the traffic. They have no physical possibility of visually identifying the threat. There is also no time left to hear the noise of the car and jump aside. Heavy metal crashes into the people at high speed. Any automotive technical calculation will show that with such contact between a human body and a moving SUV, the chances of survival are equal to a mathematical margin of error. 5 suffer critical internal organ injuries and multiple fractures. Death occurs right at the scene of the impact. The car continues to slide for a few more meters by inertia, after which it finally comes to a stop in the ditch. And only after a full stop, with the interior locked from the inside, is that very sound of the starter motor heard with which we began our investigation. Mechanics of the crime have been proven and compiled into a single report. No one has any more illusions about exactly how everything happened. The judicial investigation moves to the final stage, the closing arguments, where specific demands for prison terms and compensation amounts must be stated. The session is moved to the most spacious assembly hall of the Noginsky court. The reason is purely technical. The standard room is physically unable to accommodate relatives, the press, and ordinary citizens. The final stage of the proceedings begins. First, the victim's demands are moved into the legal arena. The parents of the deceased Andrei Seaman file formal civil lawsuits for compensation for moral damages. The documents are drawn up with specific figures. The claimants are requesting 3 million rubles each for themselves, as well as a separate payment of 3 million for their 11-year-old granddaughter. I often have to study financial claims in criminal case files, but in this context, the dry math is particularly hard to take in. 9 million rubles. That is the formal value placed on the loss of almost an entire family. Next, the state prosecutor takes the floor. Prosecutor reminds the court that the maximum penalty under the charged article provides for up to 9 years in prison. However, the final demand from the state representative turns out to be below that threshold. The requested term is 8 years. But the most important detail of this statement lies not in the numbers, but in the conditions of serving the sentence. The prosecutor's office is asking to send the defendant to a settlement colony. From the perspective of the penal system, this is an institution with a very lenient regime. It allows for relatively free movement within the grounds, a lack of strict isolation, and the ability to wear regular civilian clothes. It is the defense team's turn. The lawyer makes a final move in an attempt to minimize the consequences for his client. He requests a deferment of the sentence from the judge. The argument is again based on the fact that she has young children. The defense demands that the defendant remain free until her son and daughter reach the age of 14. The positions are fixed, and the demands have been voiced. Both sides have put all their arguments on the table, outlining the extreme limits of potential decisions. The court retires to the deliberation room. Justice must now reduce this complex formula of lost lives, millions of rubles, and legal articles to one final denominator. October 8, 2012. The procedure for announcing the final decision of the Noginsk court takes nearly 2 hours. All this time, the defendant stands with her back strictly to the courtroom. For 120 minutes, she does not turn once, neither to the camera lenses nor to the relatives of those left on the side of the Bessorovsky highway. The judge reads the operative part, and here, a procedural shift occurs that completely shatters the expectations of those present. Take a look at the final wording. The court does not just deliver a guilty verdict. It categorically refuses to support the lenient position of the state prosecutor. The prosecution's request to send the defendant to a settlement colony is officially rejected. The court concludes that the criminal negligence displayed behind the wheel and the gravity of the consequences rule out the possibility of rehabilitation in comfortable conditions. Ekaterina Zatsul is sentenced to 8 years in prison. The place of confinement is set as a general regime penal colony. As an additional sanction, there is a ban on operating vehicles for a period of 3 years. The defense lawyers quote petition for deferment of the sentence due to having young children is denied in full. Next, the matter of financial claims is closed. The sum of 9 million rubles claimed by the victims is deemed excessive. The civil lawsuit is partially granted. The convicted woman is ordered to pay the prosecution side 3.5 million rubles. The procedure for granting a regular pension to the orphaned 11-year-old girl is transferred to separate civil proceedings. But from what funds will the officially unemployed woman cover the multi-million ruble damage? The collection mechanism is already documented. As a security measure, the court has seized all identified property of Zatsul. This property is the very SUV that was The defendant listens to the figures of her sentence calmly. No outward emotional reactions are observed in the holding cage. Immediately after the session closes, the defense attorney tells the press that he considers the punishment excessively harsh. He has 10 legal days to prepare and file an appeal. The Semin family's relatives leave the building in complete silence. The representative briefly tells reporters the victims do not intend to give any comments to the press and will not appeal the verdict. With that, the legal timeline is complete. The events are laid out in a single straight line. From the first second of losing control on wet asphalt to the strike of the judge's gavel. The attempt to avoid responsibility without leaving the locked car has reached its documented conclusion.